I'm a senior at Mountain View High School, and you're listening to the West Ada Podcast.
So as you look at financial situations, as you look at decisions, you're going to look through the lens of what is best for the kids of West Ada School District. And so if everyone around the table comes with that vision, which I do at our district, that is one of the things I love most about West Ada, is we sit in meetings, and yes, we're talking about financials, and yes, we're making budgetary decisions, but there is always a lens of what is best for our students.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the West Ada Podcast. And I'm not sure I would ever call talking about finance very thrilling or exciting, but this is a necessary conversation.
I think I totally geeked out on it, Ken. Like I hope people will listen and hear this information because it's so valuable, not only as a parent, but as a taxpayer. Like it matters where our money goes. It
does matter. A couple of great guests and a couple of really intelligent financial guests.
Absolutely. We have Dave Binetti, who is our Zone 4 trustee for our Board of Trustees for West Ada.
Yeah.
He has a phenomenal business background, including an MBA.
Yeah, both of our
and
guys
Jonathan too.
MBAs,
Jonathan Gillen, he's the CFO for West Ada School District. Also a brilliant man with unique experience, because you have to have unique finance experience for the education system and how that funding works.
100%. And I think the thing that maybe you're not going to see in this podcast, but one of the things I love about Jonathan, he is kind and he is funny.
Right.
And anyway, both these guys, fantastic at what they do.
We're lucky to have them.
You're going to love this conversation. Here you go.
Today we're talking with David Binetti, our Zone 4 trustee for the Board of Trustees at West Ada, and our CFO, Jonathan Gillen. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, great to have you both here. Thanks for being here, guys.
Yeah, I'm super interested in this conversation because I have to admit, as working in education as long as I have, I'm just like, I think I have the nuts and bolts of education funding and budgeting. But I would really love to give our parents and listeners a really kind of more deep dive so you can understand what your tax dollars are going towards and how it affects our kids' education.
100%. It's great to have you both here. If you don't mind, just give us a quick background. Jonathan, if you want to start, you've been with the school district for 7, almost 8 years now. You don't have to go deep, but just tell us what you've been doing, a little bit about your background, if you don't mind.
So I started, 7 or 8 years here at West Ada. I've had the luxury of being the chief financial officer here, being involved with operations. Great organization, opportunity to help kids. Previous to that, I worked for a startup charter network and providing services to schools all over the U.S. And then previous to that, I was the CFO for a college. And then typical accounting background, got my CPA, have my MBA. So standard, worked in public accounting for a little bit. But really, even when I was in public, knew I wanted to get into education. It's a great occupation to work in and a great opportunity to help kids.
Very cool.
And while we're right on that, I think it would behoove us to explain a little bit how budgeting and finance and things like that in the public education system is so different than it is in
the quote unquote real world or whatever.
Business world, that kind of thing. So you bring quite a wealth of knowledge that a lot of people don't have.
It is a little different. So obviously when you're looking at a for-profit entity, you're focused on financials. You might be focused on bottom line, generating net income. Here, while we do focus on the financials and we are focused on ensuring we're fiscally responsible, we're also focused on the end goal and the focus on kids. And so it's balancing that need and use of resources while also balancing the need that we need for instruction and the focus that we need to have kids on the classroom every day. And so it's managing through that, understanding the different funding streams. State funding streams can be a little different in their calculations and complications. And so it's just managing all of that as you kind of work through the day. Again, still focused in the end on the goal is how do we use these dollars and these tax dollars to effectively help our students.
And it's important to know that because nationally, the number one reason that charter schools fail is the lack of fiscal knowledge around that public education. So I really appreciate you being here and sharing that with us.
Yeah. Well, and David, for you, I mean, you're an entrepreneur. You've started 5 or 6 different businesses. You're on our board of trustees. Why do you do what you do? What's your background? Why do you do what you do?
I do it for the kids, just like everybody else, right? So that's the whole focus. And if I can help bring a little bit of my expertise to the world of education, and I have my own 2 daughters that are in the district and get a wonderful education, and so to the extent that I can help them, that's my motivation.
That's very cool. Okay, well, I'll be completely honest with you all and with our viewers as well. One of the reasons why I really wanted to do this podcast was that a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, you actually, in one of our board meetings, went through some deep dives, some statistics that I think are hugely important
absolutely.
for our parents to hear, for our teachers to hear. So if you don't mind, if you're listening, if you're watching, let's go to that soundbite. I want to let everyone hear what you had to say a couple of months ago.
And I just want to put some numbers to this, right? So in 2004, the per 100,000 tax rate in the West Ada School District was $669.81. And 10 years ago in 2014, it was $408.70 per 100,000. And in 2024, thanks to both the fiscal stewardship and, of course, credit to our legislature as well, $59.90. And with our most recent levy, reduced those taxes even further, and yet still are able to provide excellent services, number one in reading, number one in math, CTE up and down, on a fabulous group of teachers and association that can work with our leadership. And it is just a great place to be in the West Ada School District.
So some amazing numbers, David. You did all that research.
I brought props.
Tell me how you dug into that, because those numbers are astounding. Where did all that come
and this
from?
is just the visual representation of that. So I literally have here $669, which is what the rate was per 100,000 20 years ago, and I'll just sort of roughly take that out to represent what it was 10 years ago. And then here is the $59 that everybody spends right now per 100,000. And the reality is, I'm sure Jonathan will talk about, is this is actually going to be cut in half in just a couple of years, right? So it will go down to about that, which will just fit in my wallet in terms of the per 100,000 per school year for what is, in Idaho, the top education in the state. Number one in ISAT scores for math, number one in ISAT scores for reading, the top offerings in terms of career and technical education, and the fact that we can do it for literal dollars, single dollars, is really both a testament to the fiscal stewardship that we have in the district, as well as our legislature really stepping up and fulfilling their responsibilities to public education as it's stated in the Idaho Constitution. So, but yeah, I mean, you can see that is
the visual.
Quite the. In fact, let's give it back to the taxpayers. There you go.
Well done.
Giving it back to the taxpayers.
And for those who are listening and not seeing us on the YouTube version, David just pulled out a huge stack of ones to show us really the difference. And as someone who's been a taxpayer in the district since 2007, that's huge to know and realize the great benefit our kids get for very little money. And I think people need to understand that. Yeah. And appreciate the fiscal responsibility that we operate with.
100%. And Jonathan, listen, I know you don't want to talk about yourself, but you and your team have done amazing work, obviously. What does that look like? How do you do what you do? Because this is counterintuitive. The numbers that we just went through, it's counterintuitive. How have you and your team been able to do that?
Yeah, it's been really a focus from the moment I got here. And even previous to that, I think our focus has always been on how we limit exposure to the taxpayers and still provide a good education, a great education for kids. And so really that team is everyone across the district. And so you just need to know that it's not just a finance office. Yes, we play a pivotal role in that, but really leaders across the district as an executive team, as a director group, we are focused on ensuring we're using our tax dollars effectively, the fiscal responsibility, and still educating kids, because it's only through that whole group, it's only that the whole district making those decisions and having this focus on how we reduce our tax levy rate and reduce the impact on taxpayers that we can be successful in that. And as you can see, I think we've done a pretty good job over the years.
Absolutely. And is that achieved through finding more efficiency in certain areas? Is it through economies of scale? Like, what are the actual tangible ways that we get our taxes down so low and have such robust education?
Yeah, it's through a lot of things. It's through really good debt management, ensuring that when there are opportunities when interest rates drop to do defeasances and other things to reallocate debt and basically pay down debt faster. It would be remiss if I didn't, just like Mr. Binetti said, to talk about the legislature and the investments that they have made. That also helps reduce our tax levy. And then as a district, it's us continuing to focus on where we can be as economically feasible as possible and where we can be as efficient as possible, which then means we need to request less tax dollars.
Well, and I can tell you for certain, as a parent with kids in the district, over this huge time span from paying a ton of money per 100,000 on my property tax, my kids' education is not compromised. If anything, it's gotten much, much better. So I don't know.
No, I mean, and that's really interesting that you would say that, because, if you actually look at the overall performance, not only are we at the top of the state of Idaho, Idaho itself is also moving up in the education rankings.
Right.
We were just recently named in U.S. World News Report number 18th in the country. If you look at the nation's report card, we're moving up on all areas. The only area that's remained flat is writing, but science and reading and mathematics, we've all improved. We're all in the top 50%. In every single category, in some cases moved up 8 to 10 points. And for instance, mathematics and ELA for our 12th graders from the nation's report card is in the 75th percentile, right? So we're achieving at that really high level. And this is the part that can be counterintuitive, because if you look at overall funding, the actual most recent stats that we have for the West Ada School District in per student funding is $9,832, and this is reported from the Idaho State reporting. West Ada is below that at 8653. So the Idaho State funding is 9,800, just about 99. And that is still, most recently went back down again, 50th in the nation, right? So we are per student funding, we are the lowest in the nation. West Ada is lower than the overall Idaho average. And then even if you look nearby at a comparable district like the Boise School District, they have $12,121. So it's, almost 30% increase, right? And so the thing that people sometimes tend to say is like, well, more education spending means better results, right? And in fact, if you actually plot it out, there's an inverse relationship between the two. And there's a lot of factors that go into it. So it doesn't mean that funding isn't important. Of course, if you had zero funding, you would have no performance whatsoever.
Sure.
But New York, by contrast, spends $33,000 per student.
Wow.
Right? And they're in the bottom quintile in terms of overall performance.
Fascinating.
And the average for the entire country is $17,280 per student. So we're like 50% less than the national average, literally a fifth of what New York spends, and yet are in the top quartile for overall performance nationwide. And that's really remarkable that you spend less and get more.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead, Katie. Yeah, go ahead.
I really appreciate you pointing out these statistics, because so often, because I've worked in Idaho state level education, right? And so often we get a bad rap and people say, oh, Idaho ranks 50th in education. But really what they mean to say that they leave out of that is ranked 50th in per pupil spending or education funding.
Yeah.
But look how well we do with little. And that's a testament to the Idaho people. That's who we are and how we operate. And
yeah, it really is.
kudos.
Well, and it's even more direct than that, because not only does West Ada comprising the largest school district in the state, and outperform, we contribute heavily to those overall state statistics. And then also, if you look at the education and performance, a lot of them has to do with things like go-on rate, which is, going on to college, which frankly is starting to change in the world, is becoming not as important as it's been historically versus CTE. And go-on rate doesn't even take into consideration, for instance, religious obligations. If students and graduates go on mission, that's counted against us in terms of academic performance.
Sure.
And of course, that's a significant portion of our graduates. So our overall statistics are even belied by what is shown. We're performing even better than that. So I would put us in top 10.
Well, and I'm kind of shifting gears here a little bit. But Jonathan, I mean, how can people inform themselves? Because everyone listening, everyone watching, we've all got budgets, but it's nothing near like what our school district's budget is. You do a good job, not blowing sunshine at you, but you do a good job of kind of explaining things in pretty simple terms when you present our budget to the board. People can watch all those board meetings on our YouTube channel, shameless plug there. But what's that? You've talked about it a little bit, but what are the nuts and bolts? How do you prepare the budget, and how then do you present it? Sorry, I'm asking you 18 questions here. How do you present it? But how can people be informed, I guess, too, as lay people out there? First things, the budget itself.
Yeah. So really, I think if you were a lay person and you wanted to learn a little bit about education funding, here at West Ada, we publish, it's a comprehensive budget book. I will tell you, it's not a simple read. Like, it is very big, but it's going to teach you everything there is to know about how we utilize our dollars with the district. It will walk through the different funding streams. It will educate you a little bit on how we spend our dollars, the impacts we have on kids, what our enrollment. It'll show you some future projections. Many of our staff here involve themselves with that book. We've received awards for years on that document that we put out. So I think it's a good opportunity to read. Should you want to learn more? Otherwise, I would also just watch the legislature and kind of learn the flow of the process. You'll hear about things that are happening in education funding. You'll be able to understand, like, where are some dollars going? What are some initiatives the legislature has? And then you'll actually see those culminate as they work through our budget process. So they'll start with vision at the legislative level, and then you'll start to see that vision become West Ada's vision or tied to our financial statements.
Sure.
And just a tip for parents real quick on that, a great way to watch the legislature and really know all things education funding that's going on there is Idaho Ed News. We had interviewed them recently, and they really do a great job of synthesizing that, so you don't have to be at the State House or watch streaming.
Sure.
And then also the budget book that we put out that's so comprehensive, that's available on our website for parents to review, for a little, afternoon reading if they so choose.
A little light reading on Sunday afternoon. Well, there's so much that's out of your control, right? I mean, the legislature has, what is that like? When there's so much that's out of your control, how do you, for lack of a better term, how do you pivot when you need to pivot?
Yeah, I think that's part of the really exciting part of budgeting. I know people don't usually put those two together.
You
right?
accountants and your fun, exciting
governmental
humor.
accounting and excitement, but really, like, it's understanding where the legislature is going, and you can kind of even see that. It's not a 1-year process. A lot of times the initiatives that are going on, like West Ada gets to be able to be involved in those funding formula changes, outcomes funding changes. As they look at things, just West Ada's involvement in general with that helps us.
Sure.
But then also just watching that process, being aware of what's going on at the legislature, and then taking that information even before it passes to try to synthesize what does that mean for West Ada. And so that's usually what happens while the legislature is downtown and they're working on the budget. I'm reviewing that information and trying to see, okay, what will be the impacts on West Ada, and more importantly, the impacts on our kids, and how do we
So there's a forecasting aspect of what you're trying to do as well.
How do we craft the budget knowing where the dollars are coming from to ensure that we have the resources available to help our classrooms?
So do we generally have kind of a draft working budget for the upcoming year, and then as things are coming out through the legislature and then finally signing die, you're just making changes to it? Like, you don't wait till the end of the legislative session to start putting it together?
No. Yeah. So we will start, I will start the budget process over Christmas break, running.
That sounds fun.
It is really fun. Hot chocolate and, and a budget document.
Spreadsheets. And
there we go. That's how accountants like to spend our Christmas breaks. So, so I'll start with that, usually with just enrollment projections, trying to evaluate how many students we think we're going to have, what is competition looking like in the area, so that we can make sure we're going to know how many students should be coming in. We'll evaluate attendance, since that's how we receive funding. And then I'll start basically putting together a draft of a budget around the end of January, early February. And then we'll start making modifications to that as the legislature adjusts their funding. All along the way, I'm kind of listening to what's going on downtown downtown, following the appropriation process, so that I can try to craft a budget. Our goal really is to have a finalized budget for at least the general operating budget around spring break. And so that's usually around the time the legislature ends. So we've been gathering information in advance of that, and then we prep a budget, and then you basically check your numbers and see how you line up.
Now, how does that process work, David, with the Board of Trustees? So I know we meet regularly. It's usually throughout the year, twice a month. But how does the communication between Jonathan and his team work with the board?
Well, the board has a number of standing committees. So, for instance, we have a policy committee, we have a curriculum committee, and we also have a finance committee. So that's participants are myself and Chairwoman Lori Frazier, who is the board trustee for Zone 1. Right. And so we sit and we meet periodically. In fact, we're having a meeting just after this one.
Oh, fantastic.
And we go over and go into more deep dives. All this information is always presented to the board at every meeting, either through financial statements that are part of our consent agenda, or there have to be actions that we would have to take to either approve potential issues that would go to the voters, for instance, a levy or a bond, and then the overall approval of the budget every year. That is something that is called an L2 form that we have to submit, that Jonathan will, I'm sure, talk about. And so that's how everything comes to the board. But we try to do as much pre-work as we can. We're really diving into the details in the finance committee, and we can ask questions, go back and forth, and then present a recommendation to the entire board. And generally speaking, that's when people have opportunity to ask other questions or participate in, as a board level. So there's a tremendous amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. And we try to keep our meetings short, and we try to get through things quickly, but it represents hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of work on the back end to just make sure that we're doing our job to be good fiscal stewards, as well as just protectors of the trust of the district, right? So doing our job.
West Ada serves nutritious meals every school day under the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program. Beginning in August, students at Meridian and Eustic Elementary Schools will receive free breakfast and lunch under the Community Eligibility Provision. Beginning August 1st, you too can apply for free or reduced meals by visiting the Link Connect website in today's show notes. If you have questions, please contact West Ada's Director of School Nutrition, Anne Brock. Her contact information is also in today's show notes. West Ada School District, preparing today's students for tomorrow's challenges.
David, something that our families and listeners may not be aware of is Idaho School Boards Association does a phenomenal job of providing trainings for school board members throughout the state. And I know our trustees attend that annual conference and all that kind of thing. But how important is it for all of the school board members, not just those on the subcommittee, to be financially fluent?
Well, all the trustees have responsibility to the public that they serve, right?
Right.
And one of the primary responsibilities there is effective management and oversight of the resources that are at their disposal. Right? And so all the trustees really make sure that they get the basics and knowledge. And that's why when we can up-level it, right, to the tax rates and the per-student funding and the different areas, it's really about shifting resources where they'll be most effective. Personally, I had to spend a fair amount of time because I do come from a more traditional background. And so
Right.
a lot of what Jonathan and I spent our time is sort of reworking what things are in the sort of corporate world to how they
Right.
attach to the education world, which was some education on my part.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And I'm sure for a lot of our taxpayers, it's the same thing, right? Most people, this is a niche finance, if you will, a niche funding source. And so,
Sure.
so to really understand, I think it's important that we do stuff like this so that we know how our tax dollars are being spent.
Well, yeah, and everybody will have a different level. The funny thing that I always find is that everything is always relative, right? So people are always looking towards how things have been potentially in the past, or other places that they may have moved from that have different perspectives. And so when people come from different areas in particular, and they realize what has been spent in other areas, then come here to the West Ada School District and have both a superior product as well as spending, in some cases, an order of magnitude less
Sure.
on their
Right.
taxes. The first question they always ask is, "My God, how is this possible?"
Right.
Well, because it is. Again, it's counterintuitive, right? Yeah.
Well, and I just got my recent tax assessment notice, and it's funny because there's a variety of different taxing districts in the state. So there could be the county level, or ambulance, or cemetery districts, or mosquito abasement districts, and these all will show up on the end of your at the end of your tax notice, and everyone will show a particular change in terms of it's been up 2% or 3%. Or whatever it is. And I just got mine and said Joint School District number 2, which is the official name of the West Ada School District. And it was year over year change, negative 57%.
Right.
And it's funny because if we would raise taxes, whether it would be for a bond to help with our growth needs or a levy to help support our teachers and SRO police officers in the schools, we hear about it, right?
Right.
Oh, taxes are going up, 30 cents is, and people get really, really up in arms. And rightfully so. We have a
100%.
responsibility to protect the public dollars. But strangely, do you get very many calls when we lower taxes by $300
None.
per year? No. Neither did I. So, and listen, again, that's what our job is as trustees, to make sure that we manage it as best that we can and appropriate. And so we don't necessarily need to have that. But I do like to make sure that we give people reminders of the perspectives, because we will definitely hear about it if we ever have a need where we have to increase our public funding to help support our schools. But we'll never get the call when we make such incredible negative 57%.
100%.
But if you could be a person who does that, right? If you could, I just Pollyanna, right? But when you see something good, say something, because humans are just more apt to complain. And if you could give kudos where they're due, why not?
100%. Yeah. Well, Jonathan, for you, and I know you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but let me back up. I hear you all the time say, "Hey, what's best for the kids?" And one of the things I like working with you is you're always looking what's best for the kids. How do you prioritize spending? How do you look at that and go, okay, here are 3 good things,
Right.
but I only have the funds for this one good thing. How do you prioritize what you do and what your team does?
Yeah, and I think for us, really, it does go back to that. It's really not that complicated when you have that vision in mind.
Sure.
When you sit there and you say, really, what is best for kids? And so when you start with that vision every single time, so as you look at financial situations, as you look at decisions, you're going to look through the lens of what is best for the kids of West Ada School District. And so if everyone around the table comes with that vision, which I do at our district, that is one of the things I love most about West Ada, is we sit in meetings, and yes, we're talking about financials, and yes, we're making budgetary decisions, but there is always a lens of what is best for our students.
Sure.
And so when you have that focus, that idea, that initiative, that goal is number one, the financial decisions, as silly as it sounds, they just fall right out. Like they really do. You can analyze and review because you have the understanding that everyone around the table is already on the shared vision. And so the rest of it is just really financial management. And those decisions come so much easier when all of us understand we're making the best decisions for kids. And that's why we're maybe advocating for this, or that's why we're reducing that. It's because we've identified that this is the best way that we're going to help our students.
And, something along those lines, too, I just have to say, having worked in education so long, I've known a lot of folks who work in public education, but don't necessarily have their kids in the district in which they work. But overall majority, most of us who are like decision makers at the district and all things, we're not just saying we're doing what's best for kids. Our kids are in the district.
Our kids are there.
Just about everyone on leadership and who works have kids in the district. And I think that says something.
Yeah.
I can't think of anyone that has anybody in private or charter. I can't think of anyone.
Off the top of my
I
head.
mean, I think that's a good stamp that we believe in what we're doing.
Yeah.
Which is rare for many public school districts. So.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe this is the wrong way to phrase this, David, but kind of playing off what Jonathan just said. Checks and balances might not be the right way to say this, but the board has an obligation to go, hey, how are we spending our money? What does that look like from the board's perspective?
Well, we're trying to produce the best value education wise that we can, and to secure the resources that we can. And look, I mean, a lot of it is not only how we parse out what we have and the decisions that we're trying to provide strategic guidance at the very highest level. We don't make individual decisions. We just try to say, okay,
sure,
we'd like to put a higher priority in, for instance, maybe mathematics or maybe additional CTE programs and so forth. But also, another committee that I didn't mention before, which is our legislative committee. And then we have board members that actually go off and advocate for the West Ada School District down at the state capitol, right? So that they're constantly advocating for public education and for West Ada in particular, and making sure that the legislature really appreciates where we are. And listen, we have to give a lot of kudos to the legislature and Governor Little. Speaker Mike Moyle comes to mind, really strong advocate for education and really not only that, but also the property tax relief. I mean, a lot of the reasons why we can pass along that relief to our taxpayers here in the West Ada School District as well as across the state is because the legislature has really devoted a lot more attention to that, to rationalizing the funding process.
Yeah.
And so a lot of credit, goes to the Senate and the Speaker and Governor Little for doing that. And that's effort that we try to do at the West Ada level, trustee level, because we're elected officials just like everybody else.
Sure.
And so that helps quite a bit.
Yeah.
While we're speaking at the State House level, Jonathan, can you maybe help our parents and listeners understand pre-COVID how funding worked, and then there was a special funding formula kind of during COVID, and now we're back to this like attendance funding, right? So can you maybe give a high-level overview of what that is, how it works, why it's important?
Yeah. So pre-COVID, essentially, we're funded based on in simplest forms, we're funded based on students who attend, so are either in the classroom or attending virtually. And so we are not funded based on who is enrolled within our district, but only when they actually come. During COVID, as you would imagine, there was some disruptions associated with that. And so the state board passed some rules to essentially get us funded based on students who were enrolled because we couldn't always be in the classroom every day. And so then as we came out of COVID and as things changed, we've shifted back to that attendance model. And so it has created some fluctuations in how we receive funding. You can see where attendance is not always 100% every day. Enrollment obviously is. And so you kind of have this little dip in funding. And so we've been working as a district to be able to manage through those changes in dollars, what the impact that is to our budget, and making sure that we can know that change is coming, know that risk is out there, and then plan accordingly to adjust our budget.
Well, and I think I need to, as I mentioned before, give kudos where kudos are due. And you certainly, and your team, West Ada as a whole, has managed that well when many of our neighboring districts found themselves in quite a deep deficit for funding with that change. So did we just anticipate that was going to be the way it was and plan ahead? I mean, how do we plan for those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think in some ways, yes. Again, we have the luxury of working with amazing people at West Ada. So all of us talked about this change that was coming. It wasn't like, oh, it's a Jonathan situation or it's a finance situation. It's a district situation.
Right.
And so how are we going to manage for this? So as we're making decisions today, we need to know 3 and 4 years from now, the decision we make today will impact our financial position later. And so what if circumstances change? And so let's make sure as we make decisions, we're thinking about what could be different 3 and 4 years from now. And it's a great group to work with that help me in making those decisions and help us make the ones so that when situations change, when situations arise, we're fiscally ready for that situation in advance. And so then it's much easier for us to implement.
Well, and I'm being a little bit redundant here. I think this is a question for both of you, though, is like, again, what we started this podcast off the top, it's counterintuitive what we've been able to do, which is very cool. How do we ensure that trajectory is sustainable, though? And maybe I'll start with you, David, but there's no simple answer, I'm sure, but how do we keep going in the right direction, I think is the question.
Well, I mean, everything is always about trade-offs, right?
Sure.
And so in a particular instance, something Jonathan didn't mention is that we received a lot of federal funding during COVID, right? But it was not hard to anticipate that those federal funds would really be one time. They were not going to last forever. And this is a significant amount of funding. And so there are a lot of districts, maybe not neighbors, but certainly I know around the country that then applied that money, for instance, maybe to, staff stipends or salaries or things that would be ongoing burdens as you moved forward past that point. So, okay, we know this money is going to be temporary, but now we're having permanent encumbrances on our overall fisc.
Sure.
And here we actually put a premium on doing one-time things. So, for instance, one-to-one learning devices, a lot of our curriculum enhancements and textbooks that are, we have to do. They're significant expenses, but they tend to be one-time expenses, and they will, have reasonable life frames associated with them. And so using sort of one-time funding for one-time expenses was just a real logical thing to do. But that could be a difficult decision when, okay, we can make a lot more people happy, for instance, if we give a salary bump, right? But if that money is going to go away, okay, well then what do you do? You do to those, and inevitably you have to let go of some people. And so you can make a short-term benefit decision and have long-term repercussions. And I think that very evident that what we've had as internal decisions is making really, long-term decisions and gives us an overall long-term stability when we're thinking about it in those times. And of course, the trade-off is you may have to have some short-term pain. And we certainly went through that.
Right. Well, from your perspective, Jonathan, the same question. I mean, how do we sustain the trajectory that we're on, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think whenever you want to sustain something, it has to be organic to the organization. And so I think that's part of what West Ada has done. We take fiscal responsibility in every single one of our decisions. We make long-term decisions today, and we know the impact of the decisions we make today will have on the future. And so when that is built into how we decide things, then it doesn't matter who is here. It doesn't matter if the executive team members change. It doesn't matter if CFO changes, controller role changes, because that's organic to how we make decisions. It's built into how we do things here at West Ada, is we review and decisions and say, what is going to be the long-term impact of this? And can we manage that long-term impact well beyond when any of us might not be here? And so I think because that is inherently built within our district, because we have that in place, that allows us and ensures that we'll continue that success in the future.
Well, I do not want to denigrate any other school district or any. But when I was researching this podcast, it didn't take me long to do some research and go, oh my goodness, all over the country there are issues, and it's the stuff we're talking about. I'm not sure where the question is. I think the question is like, that's a culture thing you're talking about. Why is that culture so important, David?
Well, I mean, everything starts with culture, right? So you can have paper and you can have systems and you can have rules and you can have processes, but the reality is if it's not embedded in the organization as just an ethos, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the culture is the thing that's the most, long-lived in terms of of how it manifests all around. And so that being really, really smart with our funds is part of our culture, always putting our kids first is part of our culture. It's just the West Ada way, right? And so that's why we're able to attract a lot of talent in terms of teachers. I mean, 87% of our budget is in our staff. I believe that's the right percentage. And look, we still have difficult time competing with, neighboring districts. So for instance, Boise School District, right? It's our neighbor. It's comparable in terms of the size, the number 2 district in size in the state. And it's interesting because funding wise, we can go down to this road if you'd like, but when we propose supplemental levies, which are the way that we help fund education here locally, if we want to help support what the state is doing, and we just actually had one of these renewed. We lowered the rate, but had a renewal of that 2-year levy. That's something we have to put to the voters. So we're beholden to the voters and make sure that they are accepting of what we're doing. And that, I'm very pleased to say, passed by over 18 points, right? So it's a significant margin that the bubble was saying, we support you. Whereas neighboring in Boise, they don't have to do that because they predate the state's founding. And so whenever they need to put operational funding into place, they can just decide it by fiat, right? They don't have to go to the voters. And so that's, again, why you see a little bit of the consequence of why our rates are, it's $8,600 per student versus $12,000 per student, because that can just be raised. And if you saw that one-to-one relationship with academic performance, then okay, that, obviously, more funding, better results. But again, it's the opposite, right? So if we look at our most recent ELA scores on ISAT, right, West Ada was 68.7, number 1 in the state. Boise was number 4 at 55.5. When we come to mathematics, West Ada, number 1 in the state, 57.7. Boise, number 7, 45.5, right? And we don't wish any ill on any of our neighbors or any public education in general, but it's important to sort of recognize how you're spending that money individually and the performance that you get. The performance per dollar spent ultimately is the metric that I look at as a trustee at the highest level. And, just historically as a business person, I really want to see what is that overall value. And in my estimation, certainly for large school districts, I think we are absolutely top of the nation in terms of value per dollar spent. I don't know of anyone who comes even remotely close, right? There are definitely districts that will outperform us in terms of their overall academic performance, and there are not many, but there are a couple that will come just under us in terms of dollar per spending. But in terms of performance per dollar spent, nobody even comes close, nowhere remotely close. And so, that's the thing that I'm most proud of, because, you could spend $30,000, $40,000 per student, try to blow out the budget entirely. But it's not even obvious to me that you'll get better results when it comes to results per dollar. West Ada is number 1 by a country mile.
Need some help in the classroom? West Ada is partnering with Varsity Tutors to provide 3rd through 12th graders access to powerful learning resources to support learning and academic success. Varsity Tutors provide students with personal learning support where and when your student needs it. Everything from 24/7 chat to essay review and enrichment classes. To learn more, click on the link in today's show notes.
All right, speaking of funding, David, you mentioned a little bit kind of how our neighboring districts are funded and how we're funded, but I think it's important for parents to realize, especially since we just went through a supplemental levy process, it's important to realize what the state gives for public education in terms of what we need to supplement in order to attract the best and have great teacher retention and staff retention and that kind of thing that ultimately benefits our kids.
Yeah, so I think the best way to handle that is to sort of take a step back and see there's 2 general areas of funding. Right. There are things like tort levies and emergency levies, and they're small things, but our CALP just put those on the side. The 2 main areas of funding are assets, facilities, what we call plant, and those are like the physical buildings, the physical land, just the hard assets that would appear on a financial balance sheet, right? And then there's the operational expenses, and these are your paper, your pencils, your electricity bills, your utilities, and of course, largely your staff, right? So your teachers and your police officers and your administrators and so forth. And so one of them are the things that are physical structure, and those are typically funded by bonds. There's also a new method that uses what are called plant facilities levies, but the 2 things there are mostly bonds, which require a 2/3 vote, which us in Kentucky are the only states in the country. Extremely high bar. If you want to, just like you would have a mortgage for your house, you take out a bond to be able to build a school. And then the second aspect of that asset funding is what's called a plant facilities levy, or what we call PFL. And those helps do maintenance. So if you have to replace an air conditioning unit or a heater or put a coat of paint or repave a ground, all again physical assets, but the maintenance aspects of it. And on the other side is the operations. And the operations are the again, it's 87% of what we do, which are salaries, right? And so the majority of our funding now on both cases come from the state. The state recently had a bill passed 521 that helped do asset funding, although traditionally that is maintained locally. And then the state provides the majority of funding on the operational side. But there's something called the funding formula. It's extremely complicated. It's arcane. I think you helped develop it, or certainly know it better than anyone else, on how money is spent on a district by district basis at the state level. And so they sort of put the money in, they plug it out, and it comes out. That doesn't necessarily make us competitive, right, for a very difficult job. Right. And again, when you look at education funding overall, state over the nation, again, Idaho's 50th, and I think we just moved up to 48th, maybe 49th right. in terms of starting teacher salary, right? And it's extremely low, right? I think it's somewhere around $36,000. Yep. And that's, hard to make a living on that, right?
So to clarify,
100%.
the state gives us about $36,000 per teacher for funding.
In that
roughly. And there's
right.
teacher
That's
premiums, there's things like that.
There's a lot more that goes into it, but yes.
But you can't live in this valley for that. And some might, so we have to be able to supplement.
So you don't necessarily have to, but the thing that you have to do is you have to do right by kids, right? And that means that you have to attract the best talent, and the best talent, of course, compensation is part of it. Now, I'll also mention that you can make more money at other districts, but there's a reason why we're attracting the best talent overall, despite the fact that we cannot necessarily compete dollar for dollar on a compensation basis. And that's because of what Jonathan talked about, that culture, that ethos, that West Ada way, where we're able to provide a wonderful environment where they know they're making a difference and they know they're getting excellent education results. Now, I do feel that us as a board of trustees, it's important for us to say, okay, is that next dollar coming in, is that going to help us make it better? Because again, we know you can get to a point where you spend more money, you get poorer results.
Right.
I think we're still on the ascendant part of that curve. I do think that we can put more money into the system and continue to get even better and better results, and at the very least maintain the excellent quality staff that we have. And I do think that we have a long way to go that we could, but still being as smart as we can to make sure that the legislature is able to take their leadership role and allow them an opportunity to do what's right there. We talked about average enrollment. That's probably an area where I'm a little concerned because we pay for the schools, we pay for the teachers. Doesn't matter how many kids are in the seats, right? And so the legislature will say, well, we'll fund you this amount, assuming it's 100%, but in reality, it's probably only closer to 90-something percent. Right. Because of attendance. But again, this is a place where our leaders help us out, like Superintendent Deborah Critchfield, helped produce some legislation, support some legislation that helped fill that gap so that we could help maintain those fixed and marginal costs. But we, every 2 years, it can only be permanent under certain circumstances, but every 2 years we have the ability to renew that, which we call the supplemental levy. And all the things that are on the operational sides, those are all called levies. Right. And so we just renewed the last levy that we had. It came out to just under $30 of that stack that I showed you, which is what we'll eventually get down to once these bonds are paid off within the next 3 years. And the bonds were the assets that were done about 10 years ago or so, a little bit less. But that very, very small amount of money, which is the only thing that's standing between that and literally zero, no taxes at all, is that supplemental that helps us keep and maintain our SROs, our police officers and security in the schools, help us maintain competitiveness with our teachers and staff that we want to continue to reward. And even when we did that, we actually lowered it just a tiny bit, just by about 28 cents,
which is pretty cool.
Which is it's
not nothing.
I don't have any change in my pocket to show you, but again, and if we can continue that route, and if the legislature continues to show its leadership, we may in fact get that tax rate down to zero, which would not be a bad goal.
Well, which is super cool. Yeah.
But so along those lines, I still have wait a minute. And this is probably for Jonathan. I would be silly to ignore the thousands upon thousands of homes and new neighborhoods that are popping up, right? And so all these folks are moving here. Great. Welcome to the Valley. But just because you move here and you buy a house and pay taxes on the house you just bought, that doesn't mean that money's going to fund new buildings for your kids to be in. So, Jonathan, can you help our listeners, our parents, our newcomers to the area maybe really realize how you just bought this beautiful new home in a lovely new area? That doesn't necessarily go hand in hand. That the builder, the developer, they're not building a new school for all those kids.
Yeah, no.
Where does that come from?
Yeah, so the funding is a little different in Idaho. In other states, oftentimes the construction of a home comes with the assessment of an impact fee,
right,
which is essentially dollars that would go to lots of organizations, cities and counties, fire departments, police officers, to schools to help with the facility needs associated with an expanding population. Idaho doesn't do that. So what actually happens with new homes and with people moving in is we levy a dollar amount. And so if there's 10 people that lived in the Valley, our levy is X amount of dollars. It's $14 million for the supplemental that our taxpayers approved, or a little less than that this coming year. And so as more houses come in, it just spreads that dollar amount across more people, effectively reducing the impact.
Right.
And so that's one of the things where oftentimes you hear a lot of people talk about, well, how does growth pay for itself? In that aspect, it does, and that it does reduce the amount of taxpayer dollars. It doesn't necessarily increase the budget for the district,
right,
but it does decrease taxpayer impact.
But how do we get schools? How do we get buildings and space for all these kids?
Yeah, so that becomes the challenge. And like Mr. Binetti referred to, passing a bond. We're very grateful for the House bill money that we received this past year. That will help us, the legislature and their property tax relief bill, which also allowed us to have capital funding, that asset funding that was referenced earlier. So that will be how we'll start to manage that process now. And then we'll continue to look into the future. If growth continues to happen, then we'll have to be managing that as we utilize those dollars and what it looks like in the future.
Well, and our facilities matter. You know, it's funny. Yeah. My son went to Lake Hazel Middle School, and it's it's not a new school, right? And but one of the cool things we're doing right now for you, if you guys are listening or watching, drive by Lake Hazel Middle School, because there's a lot going on over there. Can you talk briefly about what's going on over there?
Yeah. So we have part of using that House bill money, part of some of that plant facility money that we had is we're able to start working on doing some internal remodeling at Lake Hazel. So we've taken a wing of the building. We're essentially going to break it up into wings or quads, and then start doing construction of the internals of the facility. So right now we're working on taking some older CTE classrooms that were not being used, turning those into classrooms, remodeling those, giving the students a 21st century educational experience. And then we're going to start working our way through the rest of the building and start making those changes to the interior, add in some lighting. We have some really unique ways we're going to bring in some light into the classrooms and kind of open those up and allow for just a different experience for kids. It's going to be awesome when it's done.
That's good. Very cool.
That is good.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that the general fiscal responsibility that we've demonstrated, certainly over the near term, as well as as part of our long-term culture as well, will put us in a position that when we do need to be able to potentially seek bonds or other types of funding for facilities, because you can improve a school, of course, but you can't do it to a school that's not there.
Right.
And so, for instance, up in Zone 4, my area, Star and Eagle, we have some kids that are in primary school that are literally live right next to Highway 16, right, on the way to Emmett, and then they have to go to Eagle Hills Elementary, which is a wonderful school, but it's it's east of Eagle Road, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's like approximately 45-minute drive on a good day one way,
right.
Which is a lot to ask of our kiddos, right? First grade and so forth. So which recommends that we have different areas that are more impacted than others, sort of south of 84. And of course, in my particular area, in Star in particular, and it's a massive growth.
Yeah.
And so, we're having some, portables where we need to put them, in some cases maxed out the number of portables. The next step is for kids to be in the hallways, take over the libraries and convert them into rooms. And those are obviously not things that are ideal for our students and our staff. And so we're hoping that by showing this continual, the fact that you are spending money well, that we can come back to the public and we can say, okay, look, please, I know you didn't give us credit the last time that we lowered taxes by $400.
Right.
But we are going to ask for a small portion of that to be able to produce the facilities necessary to maintain that high degree of support that we have.
Right.
And even if we were to make fairly significant investments in that area, we have the legislature helping us out, right? This $140 million that came from that House Bill 521. Which will go a long way, but over 10 years, you really start to think about it. $140 million divided by 10 is $14 million per year over 58 schools, is about $250,000 per school. That'll get you maybe half a parking lot, right? And it certainly won't help you with new construction. Now, we're going to be as smart as we can about those types of things, but eventually, and this is just, this is how it works. Certain generations paid to pave the way to help support the future generations. And that's exactly why you do bonds and you build these schools and help maintain that support for future generations. And so what we're really hoping and trying to do is say, look, we're really trying to be smart. It would be very easy for us to just cut everything to zero and have a really crappy performance. What we want to do is really be able to be balanced and to use our money smartly and ask our population, and then to be able to support that with the proper facilities and the proper number and space of facilities. And so that may involve some difficult decisions, right? We have what are called boundary committees, and the boundary committee can shift the existing boundaries of schools, because we have some schools in the Cloverdale corridor in particular that have relatively low attendance rates just because of the migrant population. And if we could airdrop a school, from that area over into Star, it would be great. Can't do that, so maybe we can adjust the boundaries that way. But I think ultimately, given the growth that we've seen, we do have the ability to support that with some additional outreach to our population. And part of what we're doing here is saying, look, we're really spending money wisely. If you have the trust in us to be able to do that, we'll continue to provide that excellent resource to the kids so that the Treasure Valley and West Ada School District in particular can be prepared for the future with students that are college and career ready.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take off my West Ada employee hat and put on my mom taxpayer hat. And this gives me, I love planning, right? I'm a planner. I love that our West Ada way, our culture is playing the long game. Yeah. Right. And so, I feel reassured knowing that we're going to have you on the board for another, you're my zone trustee and
another 4 years.
Another 4 years. Yeah. I don't feel so reassured knowing that our friend Jonathan is on to new adventures. So, do you like that segue?
I do like that segue.
Why don't you share with us a little bit what your next step is and what that looks like for us?
So I am going to be providing still in education. I got to tell you, I love working with kids. I love the profession of education. And so I will be working with an entity that provides financial and operational support to schools throughout the U.S. And so we'll be working with charter schools and smaller districts, maybe not the size of West Ada. We'll see as we go, but and really just providing the same kind of level of service I hope I've brought to West Ada to other schools throughout, and just really getting the opportunity to try to see how we shape education across the U.S.
Well, I'm not blowing sunshine at you.
I was just going to say, I'm not going to use Ken's term of blowing sunshine, and you did it.
You're the funniest accountant I've ever met, man. We're going to miss you.
Yeah, for sure. But thank you for setting us up, though. Thank you for cleaning things up.
Because it is the culture thing.
Yes, the culture thing, and establishing that. Because something I think that's so frustrating as a taxpayer is to see these changes in administration. You're like, oh, we spent all this, millions of dollars on this initiative, and just kidding, that's out the window with a new administration. But because the culture is established here, the West Ada way, that gives us some good assurance.
It has been an honor to work here. I've loved every minute of it.
I know. I'm glad our kids are in the same school, so you're not going to get away from me. But
100%. Well, guys, can't thank you enough for your time. Thank you for what you do. It matters. It matters to our community. It matters to our education. And anyway, just can't thank you enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a ton of information. I don't
So
know.
much.
I don't know how they do it all.
So
I'm so
much.
grateful for people like that. But one thing that I just want to clarify, because I know I agreed to it, and I thought, that doesn't seem right, is the amount of teacher pay. I want to make sure we give credit to the State Department of Education, our state board, our legislature, who have worked really hard over the last 10 years to really increase that starting teacher salary.
Right.
And David Binetti and I agreed, it's about $36,000. That was probably 10 or 12 years ago, the starting salary.
Right.
The state does fund just under $48,000 a year for a first year starting teacher. But still, even in today's world, I know our budgets are stretched tighter and tighter. So I just wanted to clarify that the state and the legislature do fund us a little bit more for teachers, but we still do need to supplement that.
Well, and I appreciate the clarification. And again, so much data coming at us. But I hope for you as a listener or a viewer, I hope that this was valuable information for you and to get to know some of the people who are making some really important decisions
and thoughtful
for us.
decision.
Thoughtful
the
decisions.
thought and care that goes into it. So
Well, we love having you here. If you would, please subscribe and listen wherever you get your podcast, whether it's Google or Amazon. If you listen on iTunes, rate us and leave a review. We would always love that. Or if you like watching, go to YouTube and subscribe on our YouTube channel there. This week's question, we really want to hear from you.
yeah, please do engage with us.
Yeah, social media or email, wherever. But here's this week's question. How well do you understand public education funding and school district budgets that influence your child's education? Because maybe you don't know a lot or you do know a lot. Regardless, I think it's a conversation that we need to have. So communicate at westada.org. We would love to
Our
get
social
your
media
feedback
channels.
there. Social media channels,
and,
all those things.
And really, I mean, I think a lot of folks might be surprised at how the funding works. So,
yeah, it really is.
Let us know.
And shameless plug, go back and listen to our old podcast. You know, football season has
It's
arrived.
upon us.
If you haven't listened to our podcast with Boise State head coach Spencer Danielson, I'm a fan of Boise State. Go back and listen to that podcast. You can go to westada.org/podcast, see all of our, listen to or watch all of our old podcasts there. So it's a lot of fun.
And while you're watching that, maybe look forward to some future podcasts we have
100%.
coming up. We have great experts in the district.
Yes.
You know, we talked about the culture of West Ada, the West Ada way, and really focusing on our kids and their well-being. And so some topics we're going to look forward to discussing are, you know, mental health and education.
Yes.
Not only for our students, but really our teachers and our administrators. There's an incredible amount of pressure. I mean, you're holding the future, you know, in your hands, essentially.
100%,
And so that's really important to discuss. And we have some great experts we're going to be talking to.
Yeah, and we're also going to be talking about behavioral issues as well. So those podcasts are going to be coming up moving forward. But again, you can email us anytime. We want to hear from you. What would you like to talk about? And we just appreciate you joining us and being a part of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.